We're going to set up that we have about 30 minutes presentation or so for Brian, and we invite the advisory committee members to let them get through the whole thing, and then we have a big chunk of time, at least a half hour, to have a discussion with him about that. So we'd like you to write down your questions along the way, and then we'll come back to them. We're up to you.
Perfect. Before I introduce Brian, I just want to talk about that.
He was telling me that the water quality is really improving, so that's a good sign for sort of proof of concept of our facilities. So that slide was meant to be planned here. So that's all that we had, and that's been constructed, and that's where we were. And then in 2010, our board of directors formed an ad hoc basin management planning committee. It was much like this committee. We met down at our recycled water facility. Just prior to that, I should say, in 2005, we had contracted with the United States Geological Survey to develop our hydrologic model. We ran the model, and we got this sort of target number. This is not necessarily sustainability, but this is a calculation based on the water budget. And looking at a 30-year average time period, we determined that the offset in our water budget is about 12,100 acre-feet per year over a 30-year average. And so what it's measuring is shown here in this simple figure. Models measure inflows and outflows. Picture a bunch of Rubik's cubes, water's going in, water's coming out. And so it's really a management and a planning tool. And it's what we use to figure out what the offset was. And then when our board formed the committee, that was their goal, come up with a 12,100 acre-feet of water. So they formed this committee in 2010 to investigate practical projects and programs that contribute to the efficient and economical management of existing and supplemental water supplies, serve as an advisory board to the board of directors. And then our basin management plan was eventually adopted by the board along with a programmatic EIR that the board certified at that same meeting in 2014. And this is the list of the folks that served on the committee, and there are some veterans in here. I see John Ricker over there. He's heard this presentation a few times, and Ron, and yeah. So we had a lot of people representing large agriculture, small agriculture, environmental, rural residents, mutual water agencies, the city of Watsonville, County of Santa Cruz. You can see the list here. So it was initially intended to be, I think, a 15-member committee. It was bumped up to be a 21-member committee. My former general manager said at the time that this was formed, she Googled what is the optimum committee size, and Google returned 0. But then there were more people that wanted to get on the committee, and so we just kept bumping it up so that people could have a seat at the table. And this was about a 2-year-long process where we really engaged the public. We sent out notification to everyone saying, if you have an idea of how to solve the water resource issues threatening the Pajaro Valley, we want to hear it. We received about 44 different projects and programs, and all of them were evaluated to some extent. Ultimately, we came down to about 7. I think I just described the objectives. And so this is sort of what it came down to. Develop new water supplies at 4,100 acre-feet per year as a goal. Conserve water to the tune of about 5,000 acre-feet per year. And then optimize our existing facilities. So I'll talk a little bit just about each of those. Hopefully someone's tracking time. So
How much more do you have?
I don't know, just like 100 slides. No, we're getting there. I'm more than halfway through, I think. So
you're about 25 minutes.
okay, great, thank you. So this is a map of our valley showing the existing facilities in purple, and then the facilities that are being considered in yellow. The biggest one of these is College Lake, and then there's a sister project to the existing Harkins Slough facility, via diversion on Watsonville Slough, and the Phase 2 project on Murphy Crossing. We've got various phases for this ongoing work. The proposed College Lake project, the yield in the BMP was 2,000 to 2,400 acre-feet per year. I dropped it down just a little bit because there's some uncertainty as we go into discussions with the fisheries agencies. But this project, College Lake is located right by the fairgrounds, for those of you that don't know. There's a reclamation district that's there. It's been operating for over 100 years. And their job is to drain the lake as quickly as possible so they can get in and farm it. So they pump all the water out of the lake, into Salsa Creek, down to the Pajaro River, and out to the ocean it goes. So we want to be able to capture that water and put it to beneficial use. It would be around 2,000 acre-feet a year. There'd be a treatment plant and a pipeline that would take it through the city of Watsonville down to our existing distribution system. And then there's the Watsonville Slough project I was talking about. There's our optimization projects to make our facilities better. We're in phase 1 of a 3-phase upgrade to our recycled water facility. First, we built a large storage tank there, a 1.5 million gallon tank, to supplement the existing 1 million gallons of storage so that we could treat all the water that flows to the facility in the overnight hours and then deliver it during the daytime. Prior to that, we would require growers to irrigate 24 hours a day, which required we had operators up 24 hours a day. But now that this new tank is constructed, we are doing a little better, and we're moving on with other improvements to that. This slide is a transitional slide, and so there's a few different kinds of programs that my board of directors has been contemplating that are outside of the scope of the Basin Management Plan. This is the most interesting one from my perspective. It's a recharge net metering program where we've agreed to work with, we have a partnership, and it goes with PV Water, the Resource Conservation District of Santa Cruz, and the University of California at Santa Cruz, Andy Fisher's team. And we are essentially, the agency's role in this is to offer a rebate to landowners that develop recharge basins on their ranches that have the ability to recharge 100 acre-feet per year or more at a rate of 50% of our augmentation charge. So our augmentation charge right now is about $231 for every acre-foot of water pumped out of the ground. So it's half of that multiplied by the infiltrated amount of water that the university reports to us. And so this is ongoing. It's sort of a conceptual project, but it could be really good for the valley as a whole. And I know that Andy and his team are trying to expand this out throughout the state and beyond. And then we also tried a 1-year program called a fallow land incentive program. And the idea of that was, could we just pay growers to not farm their ranches? And the board took that one on at the request of landowners. We had a $200,000 budget for it, and the idea was, we'll give you $1,000 an acre to not farm. And it turned out $1,000 an acre is not really enough water, enough money to convince somebody to not grow, especially not if they're growing strawberries at, I don't know the value of maybe $70,000 an acre. So this is an innovative program, and we'll see where we go. So there was a company formerly known as Hydrometrics that we retained to do our modeling of this effort, and this is a result that shows here. This is for the upper part of the Aromas, and this is implementing phase 1. So this is our College Lake project, our Watsonville Slough diversion, and optimizing our Harkin Slough facility and our recycled water facility. If implemented as planned in the BMP, it does this to our groundwater basin. You can see a 2 to 3 foot increase in water levels in our delivered water service area, a 1 to 2 foot increase in water levels extending beyond there, and a 0 to 1 foot in other places. I wouldn't trust too much what goes on in the middle of the bay, but for this area, this was the best result from the model. Overall change in water levels. And then how does that affect seawater intrusion? So there's 2 maps here. This is also from that same modeling effort. The map on the left shows the extent of simulated seawater intrusion, or in other words, the way the modeling team spoke about this is, these are coastal inflows, and AKA seawater intrusion, happening along the coastal area under current conditions. And then this is what the coastline would look like with the implementation of phase 1 of our projects and programs. So it looks a lot better. And then you can also see the redder it is, the more, the greater the rate of coastal inflows. That's right. And then if it's lighter color, there's still some seawater intrusion happening, but it might be at a significantly reduced rate. So you might be thinking, well, that looks pretty good for this area, but we're up here and this still doesn't look so good. And I would tend to agree. So we do have other projects that are planned, and it's kind of hard to see this map, but when we built our coastal distribution system, we did a lot more designs than was actually shown. And this figure here, all the pipes that are shown in purple have been constructed to date. But there are some pipes shown in orange, here, here, and extending up towards La Selva Beach in this area and into the land trust parcel up here between the sloughs. Those are all in orange. And those are pipelines that have been designed but not yet constructed. We are right now, a supplemental water supply derived, or we need more water basically from our supplemental water facilities, which is why we're building these supplemental water facilities. And so then we would construct additional pipelines. If I just zoom in on this area here, because I know it's more of interest, This is the northern extent of our distribution system, and it ends at just about Sunset Beach. So then this we call the F series, the F lines, and it extends up past Monterey Bay Academy and heading up towards La Selva Beach. So these are future pipelines that would get built with later phases of our BMP. And another thing to point out is that for critically overdrafted basins, the goal is to achieve sustainability by 2040. Our phase 1 projects, the goal is to have them implemented and delivering water by 2025. So that still gives us 15 years of time to evaluate how successful, or I guess that's the way, how successful our projects are, and if they're not as successful as planned, that we still have 15 years to make progress. So I could stop right here, because I wasn't sure how I was going to do on time, or if you're interested to know about how we go about funding these projects and programs, there's probably 5 or 7 or 100 more slides.
So let's do a time check right here. So it's, we have about 25 minutes left for this agenda item, which is intended to be for discussion questions. For Brian, it sounds like he has 5 more minutes?
If you're interested, I can do 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes?
And I'll leave you a copy of the presentation so you can dive into them. I'll give you like the brief primer on each, and then you can do what you like.
5 more minutes, and then we'll break for questions? Sounds good? Sure.
Let the record show the committee made the choice, and I didn't just ramble on.
So stated.
Okay. So, funding of future projects and programs. I was asked about a month ago to come and give a very similar talk to the Salinas Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Arguably, they're more like Pajaro than the Mid-County Agency, although, for the record, I live right down the street, so I'm in your service area. And they were really interested in how in the world did you ever get meters on private wells of farmers and so forth. And so I talked a little bit about that. I started off with showing, what are our revenues and grants, because I think that's important just for people to understand where the money comes from and how it gets used. So you can see here in our expenditures, most of it goes for basin management activities. Some of it goes for paying off the debt service on our projects. Some of it goes to general administration. On our revenues, this dark blue slice of the pie, about 64%, this is coming from our augmentation charge. So we're predominantly funded from people extracting groundwater and then paying our augmentation charge. We're also, the grant revenue really changes year by year. So some years it might be a quarter of our total income, and other years it might be closer to just a few percent. But grant is important. And then the last big slice of this pie is our delivered water sales. We have gone through, if you follow case law and you follow Proposition 218, we've got cases with our name all over it now. And so we're very cautious about this. The last time we went through a rate setting effort, we've done 2 in the last 10 years. We had a 2010 effort and then a 2015 effort, which this is the one I'll speak about. We had a 2-phase part to this work. We formed a committee. It was a subset of our planning committee, but people that didn't pay our bills dropped off, and just those that still paid our bills stayed on it. The first part of that was to determine a rate setting methodology. We had just gone through the court system, and our augmentation charge was in our favor through the appellate court, went up to the Supreme Court. They declined to review it, so then it became precedent-setting case. So that was the safest route, sort of the uniform rate with the augmentation charge. But a lot of the folks in our area want to move towards a tiered rate system. That's a whole nother presentation but we're still studying tiered rates. We also looked at other things like assessments and time of use and so forth. Once we established what kind of rate we're going to use, the phase 2 was to actually calculate it and develop what they call a cost of service report, which has to justify where all your rates go and what are your expenses and so forth. It looks something, so we built off the 2010 effort. In 2015, we added additional funds for the BMP projects and programs. We restructured our old debt. We saved a lot of money, like $30 million. And we built off of the Pendry Griffith lawsuit that then solidified our augmentation charge. We looked at our policies, we looked at our revenue requirements, we divided it up into different buckets or budget categories, and you can see them listed here. So it's things like administration, operations, metering, planning, capital improvements. And we also looked at our augmentation charge, inside delivered water zone, delivered water service, and rural residential. So each of those takes on a different meaning in the cost of service report. All of that goes into step 3, which is the rate structure design. And then we gave tools to the people that participated. Our participants, they wanted to be able to go tinker with things on their own. So we built like little games, like if you ever play Atari or something, you get a joystick and you can go play this game. We gave them spreadsheets that allowed them little spreadsheet models that looked just like this with orange boxes that they could change. So if they wanted, this was a tiered rates evaluation. So if they wanted to do tiered rates, they could say here, we'll pick 5 tiers. So then this shows up to 5. And then you can set, where do you want the tiers to stop? Half an acre foot, a foot, 1.5, 3, and so forth. And then that shows what do the rates need to be and how does that affect apple growers or nurserymen and all these things. So it was, the activity was really to get the stakeholders the ability to make their choices on their own by tinkering with the analysis themselves rather than just trusting that the engineers and staff are giving them the information. And then this was our uniform rate tool where similar kind of idea. We put in the different values and they see how the rate structures grow. They had to determine, do they want all the rates in 1 year and then flat for the next of the time, or ultimately they wanted sort of a smooth rate increase. So it looked something along this line as opposed to something like this or this. And then this is what our rates are in this fiscal year, and then they cap out. So there was a 5-year series of increases from 2015 through 2020. So when we get to the end, it's going to cost $246 an acre foot to pump water in the area outside of our delivered water zone. If you're pumping water inside the delivered water zone, that's $338. Why does it cost so much more? It costs more in part because many of your neighbors, and maybe yourself included, are benefiting from the supplemental water supplies that the agency is delivering. And if your well goes down and you're a farmer, you can connect to our system and have a backup water supply. And even if you don't want to connect to our system, the water levels are less stressed in that area. The groundwater is less stressed because there's so many other people that are taking the water we're delivering. The augmentation charge for residences is $115 per year per residence in our basin as of 2019-20. So we're not there yet. And then our delivered water charge, you can see here, will cap out at about $392 an acre foot. The only other thing to really consider here is that we estimate it costs between $100 and $120 of sort of operations and maintenance costs for your well. That would be PG&E, the energy it takes to lift the water up from the subsurface and put it into the pipes, and maybe an amortization of your 30-year loan to build your well. So if you add $100 to this price, you're at roughly $438 to pump your own well versus $392 to take the delivered water. So there's sort of an embedded incentive to take our supplemental water supply. And so this is the zones. If you're in the purple, that's an inside delivered water zone rate, which for this year is 309. And then if you're anywhere else, you're looking at 231. And that sort of wraps it up, so maybe it was a little less than 5 minutes. So, you know, if I had to drop it down to a few key points, the agency in its earliest days did a lot of basin management planning sort of in an isolated box between the board of directors and the consultants. And that backfired, and it didn't build alignment within the ratepayers and the constituents in our community. So starting around 2005, 6-ish, we really started to bring more people in. When we had our model effort, we had a technical advisory committee. When we had our B&P committee, we brought in all those people you saw. When we did our rates, we brought in people and we gave them the tools to test rate setting methods on their own. And I think that was really beneficial. Our projects are working to slow the rate of seawater intrusion as best we can tell, and it's working to ease the overall overdraft in the valley. But there's still more work to be done, and that's why we're moving forward with these projects. And we're going to be looking at another rate setting effort probably in the next 12 to 24 months so that we can come up with a revenue stream that can help us acquire the kinds of municipal bonds or grants that will help us to fund the College Lake project, which has got an estimated construction cost of about $45 million, and that doesn't include land purchasing. So that's where we are, and we have an updated website to make it easier for you to find information about us. So if you have any questions, I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, very much for a very thorough presentation on Pajaro Valley. So we do want to take questions now and to have a bit of a dialogue on here. So see John's hand up. I just want to get the cue. John, hands up.
So I want to check 3 or 4 things that you said. So there's purple pipe, which would be only used for agricultural irrigation, but is College Lake something that could be used for drinking water or not?
that's, you raise a good point. I should have said in my presentation early on that we do not deliver any potable water
Okay,
for any reason.
okay,
So all of our facilities would be for agriculture.
great. So when you're thinking about extending the red lines up towards La Selva, would that then be that the farmers there would have the option to take that, or is there a thing that if you're close to the coast, you're required to take that?
So far, there's no requirement, and so far, there doesn't need to be a requirement. In that purple area that we saw a couple slides ago, the average, if I just talk in round numbers here, the average water demand in this purple area is about 10,000 acre-feet per year. This year, our total supplemental water delivery is about 5,000 acre-feet per year. So there's twice as much demand as there is supply that we have. We build College Lake and we get another 2 to 2,400, then we're 3/4 to the demand. We build the Watsonville Sioux project and then we're getting close to 100 demand. The one thing that does happen, and we just got done talking about this at our projects committee that only ended at 4:30, is there's really no extra water supply during what we call the peak irrigation season, which is roughly, call it May through September or June through August, something like that. When you get into the off-season, what we call the shoulder months, January, February, March, and October, November, December, there is additional water that we could just deliver. So our committee was just talking about things like, well, if we do build more pipelines, how would that work for people that are already connected to the system and for kind of the newbies that would eventually get the water? And so our long-term goal is to continue developing additional water supplies to feed into that pipeline and ultimately be able to really significantly reduce groundwater extractions through the coastal area. And then through the conservation program, reduce groundwater extractions through the valley as a whole by 5,000 acre-feet. And through the recharge net metering program, most of the best sites for recharging the groundwater basin are back in the foothills. So if we're getting that program as a goal of about 1,000 acre-feet per year and to achieve that goal within 5 years. And then if we can do that, I'm pretty sure that my board would consider funding that as like an official basin management planning program.
Good. John Pajaro.
Brian, very impressive, pithy presentation tonight.
Thank you.
I hate to see what you would do if you weren't. I told you you're so sick and hardly make it, but very.
It's adrenaline, it's just pure adrenaline.
Yeah, very good. You showed in the early part of your presentation the vast majority of your water is going to ag use. I was impressed how you showed a decline over a 5-year period, with the max at 2013, at least in recent times. How can you explain the decrease?
Well, so I would explain it a couple ways, and you can see it most easily in the graph. One of it is rain.
Yeah.
Rain definitely helps. With all of these projects, the joke is just add water, right? For our stream flow diversion, we have these facilities, and there are some years, like this year, and as we went into the drought, we had 2 to 3 years where we couldn't operate our diversion facility at all because the water in Harkins Slough was either of insufficient supply or insufficient quality that we couldn't use it. So rainfall is a big deal, and you can see rainfall pushes down extraction. The other thing is, we've been investing heavily, to the tune of $200,000 to $250,000 a year in a conservation program, where we work with growers, and we don't just do tailgates. I mean, we do tailgates where you just have these, you hand out free food and you hand out instruments and information about how to conserve water. But we've changed our program since around 2014, where our goal is really to get growers into our program and then to stick with us for a 3-year period or longer. And over those 3 years, year one is sort of an assessment of how they're doing their irrigation on their own. Things like measuring distribution uniformity. If you put a bunch of cups up under a sprinkler system, are the cups all filling at about a uniform rate, for example? Or if you're using drip tape, is this equal pressure throughout? It's really hard, especially if you're on a slopey terrain, to nail that down. And then in the second year, we'll say, can we just have a small area, maybe 10 acres out of a 60-acre ranch or something, where we implement best management practices on this acreage, and we do a compare and contrast. How do we do compared to your area? They can still overrule anything because at the end of the day, they need to make their money by bringing their crop to production. But we can work together hand in hand with them, and we teach them tools like Crop Manage and other tools that are out, published by the University of California Cooperative Extension. And then ideally by the third year, they're transitioning more of their ranch to the best management practices that they've learned. And most of the growers we might be on one ranch, but they've got other ranches, not only in Pajaro Valley, but also in Salinas Valley and maybe down in Ventura. So ideally, if they learn stuff in our area, we want them to go and spread the word and get it out there.
So really through education.
Education and
Informing these farmers how they can do it better, conserve water, and still be sustainable.
yeah, we're trying to get that information out there, and it's all voluntary at this point. That was a very important part from the Santa Cruz County Farm Bureau on our planning committee. They really support conservation, and they want it to be voluntary conservation. Otherwise, we're looking at things like what do you call it, groundwater limitations on extractions and so forth, a lot.
And I love that the program you guys kicked off a few years ago to recharge net metering. I think I was the first one to call your office when I read it.
Yes, yeah, we met at your ranch.
Andy's been out, we don't know if my size is quite sufficient to meet your 100 acre feet.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that maybe in our basin, we could find some way, it's a little harder to recharge with our geology, as I understand it, and John's explained to us. But in our own foothills, if we could find some way to get private landowners to participate and try to get some water down to the aquifer passively.
I don't think that many basins in the state are going to achieve sustainability if they can't nail down how to recharge the basins. I think recharge is hugely important.
So I've got David, John, and then anyone else in the queue?
Do you guys mind if I take a chair? No, I'm not. Just so I don't tip over.
Another question too.
You want food? We can give you food. We have free food like
Thanks.
this.
Maybe.
That's water.
Yeah, so my first question is, what is an augmentation charge?
What is it?
Yeah.
It's a fee on groundwater extractions on a well-by-well basis.
So, and that means, and how does that differ from a delivery charge?
Well, in the delivery charge, we are delivering water to the ranches via pipelines we've constructed. In the augmentation charge, it could be the extraction of groundwater from a well that's nowhere near our pipelines. It's just a private well on a private property, and there's an ordinance, the most recent one is 2015-02, that determines what the augmentation charge is.
So you're basically charging private pumpers for the water that they take out of the ground?
We are, and it's for groundwater management activities.
Okay. And then you had some litigation that was about your rate structures?
We had litigation, we had lots of litigation about our augmentation charge. So one of the cases, the Henry Griffith case that was on there, one of the key points was if the agency is providing a service through the augmentation charge, we respectfully ask to discontinue the use of that service and no longer be billed. And the courts determined that groundwater management, and I'm a hydrogeologist, not an attorney, so for the record, but the courts determined that water management within a basin of the sort that we're doing is a service that we can charge for, and you can't just ask to get out of it.
Okay.
You can ask, but you can't.
Other than that, is there anything else instructive about the litigation that might apply to our basin? As we're setting rates, when we consider how we might set rates, if we set rates for things?
Well, I mean, I don't know about our cases in general, but there's been a lot of case law recently about Prop 218, and so there's cases in Southern California, Buenaventura is one, Capistrano is another, where they handled various nuances with this. So I think in one of them it was probably Capistrano, but don't hold me to it. They didn't have a robust enough cost of service report that justified why they were charging the rates they were. So you need to make sure, as you're setting rates, you need to develop a cost of service report that is just solid. It needs to really clearly identify how much does everything cost, why do you need to charge what you're doing, and where's the money going. So we've had to do that each time. It's got to be stamped by an engineering firm. And then...
But that's what districts already have to do for 218, isn't it?
Was that?
That's what districts already have to do to set rates under 218, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, but so in Capistrano, they had sort of a conservation tier that wasn't justified well enough, and they ended up losing. And then the Buenaventura case, which was settled in December of 2017, that case was more about augmentation charges in general. And this is where it kind of hits us, we get a little sour about it. In 2008, we lost a lawsuit because the court case, and this was Griffith, I would have driven it out, said that we didn't follow a Prop 218 compliant process to set our rates, and as a result, we had to repay the ratepayers of the valley roughly $12 million over a 3-year period. Now, that case couldn't exist today because in December of 2017, the courts determined that groundwater augmentation charges are not subject to Proposition 218, but rather they're subject to Proposition 26. So had that case been decided before our case, you know, we'd be $12.5 million more to put towards water supply facilities. So that was a big one, and I actually, there's a really thorough memo on my website, because I had my council deliver a report in December of 2017 to the board of directors about that.
So John Ricker and then John Kennedy.
Brian, do you also have a management fee?
There's a management fee, yeah, and it showed up in the, it's small, I think it's roughly, it changes commercial versus residential, and it's around $18 per year, and it shows up on the tax rolls. In total, the management fee produces like $350,000 a year, whereas the augmentation charge is more like 60%. So you can see the management fee is right here, 3% of our income compared to 64%.
So it's on the tax roll?
Yes, and
For the
that
parcel.
and so every year our board has to adopt a motion to direct the county tax assessors to place the management fee on there.
And that's a Prop 26, which means 2/3 state vote.
I don't know, it's just been happening so long and produces so little money, I haven't researched it, to be
I
honest.
can say that the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, we have a water management fee that is charged on the tax roll, then we have a water supply fee that is charged by meters.
Right, and then the Salinas Valley, they don't have meters on wells, they have sort of assessments, zones of assessment, right?
Zones of benefit.
Zones of benefit.
I wonder if those management fees were put on before Prop 218. I don't know if they were pre-existing, then they just continue sort of.
The Monterey Peninsula were.
I believe that our management fees were our first form of revenue.
Yeah, I think they were. So for us to do something like that, we might have to do some additional rules to get it on the other question I wanted to say, you talked about the water conservation efforts. It also seems like the community water dialogue put a lot of emphasis on sort of a lot of peer pressure. Maybe, I mean, for example, a lot of the growers sort of got together and said, we need to do something. And folks like Driscoll's, and they do a lot of their own water conservation programs, water efficiency programs as well. That has helped move things in the right direction.
Yeah, from my perspective, it doesn't matter how the word's getting out there, so long as the word's getting out there.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes to go on this item. I have John Kennedy, Ron, and then Tom.
So you mentioned the effect on the plastic covering, like around the berries, and what that does to runoff. Can you say a little more about how you'd like to see that go?
Well, you know, I don't have any real influence on what growers do on their own ranches, but it's easy to see if if you're covering an 80-acre ranch with plastic, it's not too different than paving a street. You know, it leads to a lot more runoff, and I mean, Rich has got tons and tons of experience in this area, to probably speak to it more thoroughly than I can, but you know, the growers do, there are certain requirements under the Central Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board for the ag order. They've got to maintain runoff, and it absolutely leads to a decline in infiltration, and it can be, you know, snowball effect is like the worst analogy, but as climate change is occurring and rainfall is happening, you know, a lot of studies show that in the long term, rainfall is going to be about the same as it is now. It's just going to come in more intense bursts. So if already you're getting more runoff because of plastic, and then you're getting shorter but more intense bursts of rainfall, that's going to lead to even additional runoff. And that maybe isn't the worst thing in the world if we have facilities in place to capture that runoff once you wherever it's going.
Well, that's kind of what I was asking about. I mean, are there things to have catchment basins at the
We're
end?
actually developing water harvesting systems for hoop houses, designed some under the program, so we're actually funding growers to put in gutter systems, hold the water, recycle it, and use it somewhere on the farm or the ranch. And other places we've done storage facilities as well. So yeah, like you look at an acre of plastic, 1 inch of rain is 27,000 gallons of water. That's new water. That's water that isn't going into the ground or plants are taking it. That's runoff. So we're talking about 1,000 acres of ground to get into gazillion gallons of water, extra water that's going somewhere.
You've got the expert on your panel, and you know, we've worked, and Rich too has worked with nurseries that can take that rainfall that's falling on top of the roofs of nurseries, and some of the growers have worked to develop basins to store that water and reuse it, and sometimes treat it even. So people are getting really creative. You know, one of the issues that we find is there's sort of a change in the overall structure. So if you were to go back several decades, most of the folks that were growing in the valley probably, you know, are either second or third generation growers, and the family owns the ranch, and they feel really connected to the land. But as their offspring goes off to college and gets degrees and any other things, I don't want to get farmers too hard or whatever, you know, then you get a disconnection between the family that owns the land, and or sometimes they sell out and you have commercial investments coming in. So once you have like a bank or retirement fund that owns the property, it becomes more challenging to work with them for management activities, because for them it's you know, I don't want to just paint the same color across the board, but there's more, let's just, to put it positively, there's more interest in preserving the land by those families that are still connected to it.
So time for two more questions,
Yeah,
Ron,
so
and then
some I
Tom.
thought you might explain, it might be a benefit to this group is, number one, do you charge de minimis pumpers, small, I know you got mostly large pumpers, you know, pumping a lot of water, but let's say a household that has a well, so that's the question, do you have any kind of fee attached to that? And then didn't that one time y'all have a 2-zone tier? If you were closer to the coast, your augmentation fee or pumping fee was higher than your interior tier, and you guys changed that, and why? I was thinking that might help this group, because we struggle with questions.
Well, our zones are just, if you're in this purple area or you're outside of this purple area.
Okay.
That's the only deal, and we charge everybody. We, when we had a committee that formed in 2008, there was a strong desire to say, if you pump less than, so if everyone in the valley pumped about 0.7 acre feet or less, probably wouldn't need a water management agency, and you probably wouldn't need all these projects. We'd be pumping at sort of the sustainable rate. So that really, within the 0.7 or less, you've got apple growers and rural residents for the most part. So there was a desire at that time to say, you folks, you're not pumping beyond the sustainable rate, so you shouldn't have to pay anything. But our special counsel warned us that under Prop 218, you couldn't have one customer class subsidize another customer class in that way. So everybody had to be charged something, and it had to be proportionate, and it had to be justified in the cost of service report.
And you had 2 zones at one time, you went to,
No,
2
just-
different fees,
just-
you didn't have that?
Just the delivered water zone and outside delivered water. So we have 2 zones, but these are the zones,
Not
inside and
different fees.
outside.
Okay.
And so, you know, as we've had 2 meetings in the last month from what we're calling a tiered rate study group, and these are the folks that want to see tiered rates. But tiered rates is, you know, I'm on a tiered rate. I get my water from the city of Santa Cruz. Thank you very much. And, you know, my rates change depending on how much water I use, but my property stays the same size every month, and it's easier to calculate. If you're in agriculture, the acreage you farm might be changing. You're changing leases from time to time. People are moving around the valley. The crops they're growing might be changing. So it's not that tiered rates aren't possible, but it's complicated. And so we have a study group that's getting together to think about this.
So Tom,
I just want to see, did I understand correctly that you're saying at some point with your augmentation charges, it can be as or more expensive to open a well and pump it and pay for that than it is to get delivered water?
Well, so delivered water is only in this purple area. So if you're out here, you're not getting delivered water.
Yeah, so I'm talking about.
But if you're in this purple area, and you just look, for right now, this is our current fiscal year, it's $309 an acre foot to pump your own well. That's our charge. That doesn't include
right.
your electricity and any other costs you have associated with your well.
So delivered water from you is $381 an acre foot.
Yeah, and it comes at pressure. So if you're a grower, the fact that we delivered at 80 pounds per square inch, it means a lot.
Yeah, so it's cheaper for them to get the water from you than it is for them to get the water and pay PG&E to do it.
But it's also, it requires a little more thinking, in part because you have to submit an order. You submit an order a couple days ahead of time, you tell our operators how much water you want and when you want it, and then what happens is everybody submits their orders and they all want their water from, 7 a.m. until noon or something like that. and we've got to split it out over an 18 or 24-hour period.
My question is, in determining these augmentation charges, was there any thought in the idea of making it more expensive to own and pump your own well? Is there a goal of having them not do that?
Well, you start to walk down a bit of a gray line, because you have to justify all of your revenue needs and your expenditures in your cost of service report. So through our process, there's just a little bit of wiggle room of where you can put your expenses. We took a very conservative approach to developing our cost of service report so that we could be successful when we knew we were going to be challenged in court. So we took probably the most conservative approach possible.
Thanks. So I'd like a round of applause for Brian.
It's great to be here, and I would just kind of conclude by saying I only live a half mile from here, so I can come again. And you all, as I said in the past, are welcome to any and all of our meetings. Our board meets the third Wednesday of most months, of almost every month.
So Brian, we're due for a break at 6:50 after public comments. If I could invite you to just listen to some of the public comments, may be interesting for you to hear. And then we're going to be eating a celebratory holiday cake and goodies. So hopefully that's
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we'd like to pause for public comment right now. In particular, we'd love to hear any comments that folks have on the topic we just heard here on the Pajaro Valley and the work that they've been doing, as Brian just described. So if I can have a show of hands, folks who would like to speak. I see 1, 2. Okay, so you each have up to 3 minutes, and Becky, if you want to go first and give your name and affiliation.
Oh, thank
Are you
you.
going to be filming yourself, or are you
I'll try and do both, but it's going to be a shaky film. My name's Becky Steinbruner. I'm a resident of a small water company in Aptos. I want to thank you for that great presentation. It's wonderful work, and I really applaud your efforts. I have 2 questions. Is the net recharge project area mostly around the foothills because that's the best soil for that to happen? And I understand, and really I'm glad you're working with Dr. Fisher to determine that maybe, but is that why it is where it is? And the second question is, are you working with Dr. Dahlke at UC Davis to try to capture some of the flood waters of the Pajaro River and creeks that support it to do stormwater recharge in those areas where the soil would permit it and uses would permit it? I guess I actually have a third question too.
Can I take the first 2?
Sure.
Before I lose them?
Yeah.
NyQuil, take a little space.
I'm sorry.
The recharge net metering program is not limited to the foothills. It could be anywhere where there's ample recharge that's found. But one of the things about the foothills is there's a larger, sort of call it a sub-watershed. So we've got the large Pajaro River watershed, Corralitos Creek watershed, but there needs to be enough of an area that would drain through where the potential recharge basin would be located. Mm-hmm. So some places, say close to the coast, might be, there is good recharge there. That's where our Harkin Slough recharge is. But there's not runoff that you can harvest and put there without sending it through a pipe, which is what we do. So that's why the foothills tend to be a good location, but it's not limited to anywhere. Andy Fisher and his group used information from our hydrologic flow model to develop a managed aquifer recharge suitability map. This was
yes, it's wonderful.
Yeah. And it later got expanded through all of Santa Cruz County. So it identifies areas at a large scale, countywide or Pajaro Valley-wide, where recharge could be good. And then from there, you have to go out and do some actual testing, because even on a 10 acre ranch, you might have some areas where there's great recharge and other places where it's not so good. So that's the first part. And we really enjoy working with Andy, and we're familiar with Helen's work, and we're not working directly with Helen, but we're aware of each other, certainly. Mm-hmm. And one of the issues for the Pajaro River is that we don't have a water right for that. And I should say that water rights are still sort of an undetermined part of this program, and how exactly it works. There's debate among the community about if the water that's feeding these future recharge basins when they get developed, is it a blue line stream that would require a water right, or is it just overland sheet flow that's not well organized and then that you could put into the basin? We did have, I showed it on one of the slides, a proposed project for the Murphy Crossing area, which would be a gallery located in the Pajaro riverbed that would infiltrate water and then through pipes and pumps move it to an area conducive to recharge. That project was considered to be a phase 2 project, and in 2013, I think, was estimated about $8 million. And since then, there is a recharge facility that was developed privately in that same general vicinity that's been recharging about 100 to 150 acre feet a year for not very much money at all. So there's still ideas. We've been working a little bit with various folks and talking with Army Corps about ideas for the levee project and potential levee setbacks that could allow areas that are conducive to recharge to flood from time to time, sort of like the YOLO bypass out in Sacramento.
Right. Yeah.
But there's probably a lot left to be done there, and we don't really have all that much say on what the Army Corps does. I mean, Santa Cruz County does, but Pajaro Valley Water probably doesn't.
If PVMA doesn't have water rights, could the riparian landowners who do have water rights?
If the water's coming from the river and you have land adjacent to the river, you likely have a riparian right to that water.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the way. Thank you. My third question quickly.
Can you build up just because we've been going for a while? I want to make sure we get the other one in,
Sure.
and we'll look back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Carla Christensen. Yeah, I just wondered what your agency's thinking was in not doing metering, direct metering of some of these large agricultural users. I know that it is possible to measure water consumption because I observed it in Colorado, but I was just wondering what the thinking was in the agency here about implementing, rather than estimating, implementing, in charging.
No, we do. We meter since the late 90s. There's been an ordinance to require meters on large wells. Any well that pumps more than 10 acre feet in our valley's got a meter.
And then what about the other little ones?
The little ones do not have meters, just not cost effective.
But they do the augmentation fee?
They do, so we estimate that.
So that's what I was
Yeah, so the rural residents are subject to an estimate, and if you pump more than 10 acre feet, you're getting a meter, so we have precise information. All the meters are calibrated and so forth.
Okay, so Becky, we'll give you one more, and then we'll pause for a break.
Thank you. My question was about the Hark and Slough recharge. And you've mentioned the small private well. How do you monitor the water quality going into those private well that could be used for domestic use? Can you talk a little bit about that and any contamination issues that have come up or are potential?
Certainly. So we conducted a potable well survey years ago and identified one potable well in the area around the Hark and Slough recharge basin. That well has elevated nitrates, and those residents are aware of that. I don't believe they drink the water. We have an extensive water quality monitoring program for the water that's diverted from the slough, and then we have probably about 15 or so monitoring wells located around the recharge basin that also collect water level elevation continuously on 15-minute increments since about 2008. And there's low flow pumps in those monitoring wells that allow staff to easily capture water samples that we can then send to the lab. So we have a pretty clear sense of the water quality in the San Andreas Terrace area for those constituents that are of interest. So it's mostly irrigation suitability constituents. There's no requirement for us to monitor the basin for constituents of emerging concern.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
The first is on the differences between the Aromas and the Purisima, and she's inviting, if folks have clarifying questions along the way, to jump in at that point, and if we find ourselves falling way behind, maybe we'll put a hold on that, but she'll present them the differences. We'll pause to make sure there are no more clarifying questions, and then she's going to present them on us. So, you know, just asking the questions, what are some of the implications for the GSP given these differences between these two options?
Okay.
All right.
Back to me. You got exciting Brian now. Back to me. Okay. So a lot of this that I've been to tell you, we've kind of touched on before in the other meetings, a year's worth of meetings now. And so it won't be totally new. Some of the information I'm showing in a little bit different format. But essentially, the summary difference between them, I'm going to touch on hydrogeologic differences, water quality or groundwater quality differences, how connected surface water is with the two different formations, being Aromas and Purisima. Sensitivity to pumping, that's kind of a continuation of our look of pumping impacts on groundwater levels, coastal groundwater levels. And then kind of use all of that to try and encourage some discussion about implications for the GSP, how it's going to impact some of the things we put in the GSP. So the hydrogeologic differences, you've seen this map before. This is the aquifer outcrop map. So it's like a geologic map, but it's the Aromas, red sands aquifer here, Purisima F, and all the other Purisima ABCs and whatnot over on the western side. Now, so if you were a bird flying over, you'd see that. A cross-section on this A line over here looks like this. You've seen this multiple times. So if you were a bird flying above here, it would look like this. So the green is the Aromas, red sands. And when we talk about the Aromas area, I wanted to define what that was, because we've talked about it, but what is it? And really, it is the outcrop of the Aromas, but that doesn't only include the Aromas, red sands aquifer. Underneath it is the Purisima. You see here, this here is the extent of the Aromas area, but there's a portion of it that also has the Purisima F unit below it. And so hydrogeologically, we kind of group those two together, and I'll explain why. And then the rest of them, of the Purisima, all these others, are in these thin bands because of the way that the formations of aquifers are dipping, and in between the aquifers are aquitars that are less permeable and do not allow water to flow so readily between the aquifers. And you're getting recharge really mostly where they outcrop at the surface. So if something's got a really tiny little outcrop, well, it's going to get a tiny bit of recharge. So it's kind of proportional. And you see the Aromas is the big, and it's a sandy material. It's called the Aromas red sands for a reason. And the Purisima is pretty permeable too. And these are the deeper Purisima become more sandstone-like. So a little bit less permeable because it's a type of material. So we get wells that are screened. A well over here would be screened just in the Aromas. And as you go up here northwest, you get some of them are screened in both the Aromas and the Purisima. So when I talk about the Aromas area, it is the outcrop, but it includes two different aquifers, the Aromas red sands and the underlying Purisima F formation. Okay. Oh, so I'm getting to these hydrographs again. As in hydrogeology, we can't get away from them. I'm sorry, but this is did you go and see some clusters of monitoring wells on your tour, right? So you may have seen these wells are very close together, and they're screened in different aquifers, right? So these solid lines here represent one well cluster with different groundwater levels. Now between them, you see about 20-foot difference between these aquifers, and these are the Purisima aquifer, which are separated by these aquitars or low permeability layers. And so you get this, they kind of, the groundwater is almost in compartments that are separated, and they each have their own groundwater level. The water from the top can't flow readily to the bottom, so they kind of establish their own groundwater levels. The dashed line over here is a multiple well completion in the Aromas area, where it's in the Purisima F and in the Aromas. And they kind of equilibrate together, because from when recharge falls on the ground, it infiltrates down through the Aromas. There's nothing to stop it to go into the underlying Purisima F. So those groundwater levels kind of balance out at about roughly approximately about the same. So you see this, it's what we call a small gradient, and in the Purisima, there's greater separation and there's a bigger vertical head. So, you know, water always wants to flow from the lowest to the, from the highest point to the lowest point, but it can't really here because it's separated by aquifers. So hydrogeologically, this to us is a big difference of how they behave. And we'll see this has got implications in water quality and also in surface water. So going on to the water quality, again, you've seen this slide before. This is just summarizing quickly, I hope, the natural differences between the aromas. This area, it's kind of the area to the south of the line, and the larger area of the Purisima. The chlorides are much. They're slightly higher in the Purisima, up to 100, and in the aromas area, about 58. Now, Brian talked about 50 was about, or 48, he said was average, which is very close, because it's the same aquifer. It's theoretically, it's a different basin, but the aquifer, red sands, extends right across into Pajaro. And so chlorides are very low, but slightly higher in this area than in the aromas. We know about the iron and manganese in the Purisima formation. The whole basin generally has a very low arsenic concentration, less than 1. In the Purisima, there's a little bit of a higher concentrations are found just in this one localized area. We have seawater intrusion. When I say the chlorides are low, they're low except for where there's seawater intrusion, obviously. What else? There's chromium that is throughout the aromas red sands. In Pajaro, they have the same problem. So there's elevated chromium down in this area here. Okay, then which I call this the slide used to be called contaminated groundwater, and then I thought that sounds terrible. So I've changed it, the land use effects. So the main point here is that the aromas is much more susceptible to surface contamination because of its permeability, how quickly surface contaminants can get down, and there's none of these restricting layers like there are in the aromas. And as such, there is rarely anything elevated in the aromas. There's no elevated nitrate. There's this one effect, MTBE from a leaking gas station. But in the aromas area, there has been elevated nitrate and some very low levels of contaminants of emerging concern, and that's related to wastewater, and this area is on septic tanks, so it's probably related to that. This over here is a 123 TCP is a agricultural fumigant, so it's probably some leftover from when there was more ag in this area. So, you know, there is a difference in how these two different areas, aquifers, behave, and possibly, you know, this area, I think that I'm not sure, John, if there is improved management in this area, or you're hoping that we can add some more controls to improve management in that area.
Well, I think it's both. I mean, the county general plan has provisions for looking at proposed land uses within primary groundwater recharge areas, and that's a lot of that is what the aromas is in the overlying areas, because we recognize that there's potential for contaminants to percolate fairly readily from the surface on down into the lower areas. So we do look at that, and we will look at that in the future.
Looking how surface water flows across the two different areas. This is quite a busy map, but again, I'll try to explain the layers that you see here. The colors in the background are those aquifer outcrop, and the reason why I did this is to show you when you put the percent of time that the streams are connected to groundwater, you see in the aromas, the yellow colors are the very low connected. So when it's in the aromas, the groundwater levels are actually quite a bit deeper because groundwater can flow down to the Purisima F unit, and so you get generally groundwater levels are greater than 100 feet below the ground surface, and so that there isn't that connection to streams like there is in the Purisima formation. These darker colors showing you that there is more connection more often in the Purisima formation as it flows over. You see even this creek over here, it's part of the Valencia Creek, and where it starts in the Purisima, it's more connected to surface water. Then once it flows over the aromas, it's less connected. So that's a very clear difference to us as well.
So, Georgina, is another way of saying what you just said, that in the aromas, the water is not influencing streams because it's moving downward so rapidly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It can be. So this, to try and conceptualize this, I often draw little sketches for myself, and I thought I would share one with you. So this to try and I tried to describe it in the white paper that's in your packet, but here in the aromas, if you have a creek flowing through it, and the Purisima F is underneath it, the groundwater levels are deeper. They're able to, it's more permeable, there's faster movement of water recharging down to the groundwater table, and there's no aquitard to limit its infiltration. In the deeper aquifer over here, less permeable, like I said, it's more like a sandstone. And slower movement of groundwater. There are these aquitards between the aquifers, and the groundwater levels generally mimic the topography. It's just not flat, you know. So you get it behaves quite differently. Okay, sensitivity to pumping. Now we did some more of these sensitivity runs with the model. And well, so this is like a whole lot of wells on this map. So, but just to point out, this yellow area over here is the aromas area. The green colors that you see is ag, irrigated agriculture. The gray that you see are small water systems, and the little dots are our best guess of where all the private wells are. And then the bigger dots that you see here are the municipal wells, and the color indicates. You would be able to see that in your packet, not so clearly here, but the deepest aquifer that well is screened in. So we're focused on this aromas area, and what we did is we eliminated some pumping. The first place we eliminated pumping was the municipal wells. 4 of Soquel Creek's wells and 2 of Central's wells. That's kind of the ones closest to the coast in the aromas. These are screens in the Purisima F and in the aromas. And so we looked at the effects of eliminating that pumping. Then we, as a separate sensitivity run, we took out all the non-municipal pumping. Now that includes in this area Seascape Golf Course, Seascape Greens, some agricultural irrigation, and a few other wells. Actually, I'm going to talk about that more coming up, I think. And then the third sensitivity run we did is that we took out all of the non-municipal pumping in Pajaro Valley along the coast, just to see what that did. And you can see these orange dots are the protected groundwater elevation coastal wells that we have. And so you'll see now a series of the hydrographs with the protected levels, and you'll see what the difference is between the runs. So this again is eliminating the municipal pumping. So just these 6 wells, we took that pumping out. And that pumping was somewhere between 380 and 830 acre-feet, depending on what base scenario we ran. And so the green line here is the result of eliminating the municipal pumping. The yellow and the blue lines are the different kind of base scenarios. This one is when we just try and redistribute pumping, if you remember from the previous meeting when we tried to redistribute municipal pumping to meet the objectives. And then this one is redistribution and reducing pumping, curtailing pumping, and about, how much is that, 3,400 acre feet or something that was reduced. So the influence, when you just remove these wells from pumping, the effect on these coastal wells are shown by each of these hydrographs. So these ones, you see, it's obviously going to influence the wells. The greatest influence is going to happen where they are closest to the monitoring wells. So these wells here have either between a 2 or a 4 foot difference once you stop. So there's quite an impact on groundwater conditions on these wells. But if you look here, also have to remember that the lower line is our proposed minimum threshold, and the upper line is the proposed measurable objective. So by 2040, you want to be at the measurable objective. We don't want to be anywhere near minimum thresholds, right? So we're already doing quite well over here on this well. This well could do with a bit of help, and this one is doing fine. So, you know, stopping pumping at these coastal wells does well. It's already above elevations that we wanted. But down here, the southernmost well is screened in the Aromas. Little influence. You can hardly see the difference there. Okay, so municipal pumping here, which is mostly in Person F, doesn't influence this Aromas well very much. Then we put that pumping back into those municipal wells. We took out all the private well pumping. There's only 263 acre feet of private pumping in that area. Most of it is the Seascape Golf Course here. Then down here, the Seascape Greens, and there's a few bits of agriculture. So you can see 122 acre feet agriculture. Only 5 of the domestic pumping. This one has, there's much less pumping happening, and it's kind of spread out here. It's only about 1 foot influence in these top 2, in the more northern wells. Then down, it's about half an acre foot down, where is this one over here, at the southern edge of the basin. And then, well, I guess this one is the southern edge of the basin. This one does have more influence than the municipal wells have, because there are more private wells that are screened shallow. Generally, private wells will be screened shallow, and that would be in the Aromas, so it does have a little bit more of an effect than the municipal wells. Then we took our pumping in Pajaro, and I've shared these with Brian, so he knows all about this. But it would have been interesting to hear what he has to say, because he hasn't said anything yet to me. But and this is little, so this is right in the, south of our boundary here. Not surprisingly, the biggest influence is at this well, right, closest to their basin. There's about a foot and a half difference. Now the result for the Pajaro no pumping is the green line. So you see here the green line is the highest. Groundwater levels have risen the most in this well, but in the 3 other more northern wells, you see it doesn't have much of an effect. The green line is below the non-municipal. If you took out all the municipal pumping, now I'm actually comparing this sensitivity run to the previous one on the same chart here. So you see the yellow is the baseline of the redistributed pumping, and then the green is the effect of stopping non-municipal pumping in our basin compared to stopping the pumping in the Aromas, in the Pajaro Valley basin. So that's complicated, but does anyone understand? Does anyone get that?
No.
It just makes sense though, the pumping in the mid-county basin affects mostly these 3 wells, and the pumping in the Pajaro Valley mostly affects the bottom. It's kind of the reverse for each group. And that's what this says, is that the municipal and the non-municipal pumping in the mid-county basin affect the Purisima F much more than they do the Aromas, because most of that pumping is in Purisima F. But in Pajaro, a lot of their wells are in the Aromas. They don't really pump the Purisima that much. Yes, Keith?
In your previous thing, you have your 3 lines on each graph. I want to make sure those are all independent things. They're not building on top of each other. Okay, just want to get that.
Well, they're building on top of the green, of the yellow. So it's take the yellow and then eliminate the pumping.
So the yellow is the baseline?
Yes, it's base, yeah. Okay. So those 4 topics that I talked about indicate that there's a fair bit of difference between those 2 areas. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity to ask questions as we've been going. Maybe I went too fast. Keith asked a question. Has anyone else got a question?
So when we see the next round of modeling results, looking at projects or combinations of projects, we will be looking at those results for both the Purisima and potentially the Aromas to see what those effects of various projects are.
Right, because so far what we found is that the projects that we've so far looked at don't affect the Aromas very much. So this is our attempt to see what we could do in the Aromas. And you know, it looks like there's little that we can do. One of the wells that we've had the most trouble trying to meet the objectives is that very southern well. And what this is showing us is that what we do, stopping pumping and by different groups, land use groups, doesn't affect that very much. And that Pajaro's pumping affects it more.
But doesn't it show, let's say we were to be able to do some type of recharge down there by the amount you stop pumping, if it was, you know, that amount would have a similar impact?
Yeah, it could.
Yeah.
So and it's a shallow aquifer, so recharge, you know, is pretty. It gets in there pretty quick without having to inject.
Right. So the type of stuff that Brian was talking about, or that sort of.
Well, they're just looking at providing a supplemental supply so they don't pump. So it's kind of in lieu recharge, I think.
I was talking about the Andy Fisher.
Yeah, I don't know where they've selected sites.
Gives you a magnitude of the problem, though, that we need to solve.
Exactly.
That's basically what it does.
Right.
Any other questions about the differences between the Aromas and Purisima areas? Make sense?
Okay, right. So what does that mean for the GSPs? I think you all kind of, if you read the white paper, you'll know that, you know, can you actually go to the next slide, maybe? You know, given that there are these differences, does that mean that we should manage them differently? We've kicked around the idea of management areas, and what the guidance says is that a management area is an area within the GSP, the GSP may identify these management areas that have different sustainable management criteria or different monitoring or projects and management actions that are required in that area. That those could be based on unique conditions, local geology, how water is used, the source of water, aquifer characteristics. They say they may, don't have to. A lot of basins that I know about, they're trying to avoid the use of management areas. You only want to use it if it is going to help you manage the basin better. Not just because it sounds like we should have one, you know. There must be really good reason. You have to seriously consider why you need this management area. Do we need to really manage them differently? What level of monitoring are you going to have? And I'm going to ask DWR here to jump in and say what they have to say on management areas a little bit too, to give you their perspective.
So what's presented here is pretty much a snapshot of it's an optional thing that's within SEGMA that was provided. So the management area was provided for areas where they are thinking about doing things other than basin-wide, something that it still has to be within the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. It still has to be very consistent, so all of the basin information, all the supporting information is included, but there was an option for basins to identify certain areas where they wanted to set different minimum thresholds and measurable objectives that are separate from the overall basin. So it gave them some operational flexibility of how they want to manage. What I've seen and what I shared with Georgina earlier was that so far I'm not aware of anyone that is going to do a management area, but that isn't to say that it isn't appropriate for other, basins in general. It hasn't been, probably because the valley, it's all one big basin. So, but as far as what is here is pretty much it. The only thing that we do want to make sure, and I think she kind of hit on it, was that you really have to sufficiently describe the conditions in the justification. And that may be why some people have kind of shied away from management areas. Because it's have to be pretty well established, defined, and really, the information has to be very sufficient for why it's going to be treated a little differently within moving forward with an implementation and the reporting.
Okay, so with that in mind, I kind of put together a few slides that captured some of the discussion I've been hearing at these meetings, and based off our modeling results, okay? So I'm putting forward, I think, 4 different possible options. I'm not saying these are management areas, but it's the type of thing you might not want to manage differently. Okay, the first one, cannot see it at all, but it's this is green, and this is yellow. It's projecting on a yellow wall, so it's all screwy, I noticed. Anyway, it's where groundwater elevations are greater than 50 feet above sea level. And it's all this inland area. When we did the sensitivity modeling of the inland private wells, non-municipal wells, to see their effect on coastal groundwater levels, this is the area. Right, so we established today that this pumping over here, it's a lot of wells, all these little dots that you see, and some ag wells as well in there, and some larger institutions. They have very small influence on the coastal groundwater levels. But something to consider is that land use might change.
Does that help?
And don't worry, I'm going to go on to the next slide. It's not that important. But thank you, Rob. So land use might change here. Right now, groundwater demand is not huge, but in the future there could be land use changes, and there may be a greater demand for water in agriculture. I would imagine being most of that demand. Is that something to consider? You've seen the area of municipal production. This is an area I've delineated based off the location of production wells, and so there's like a well here, there's a well here, each like inflection here is a well, so it's right on the edge of those wells. This represents the zone where most of the basin's pumping happens. It's from municipal pumping and institutions like Cabrillo College and Seascape Greens and the Seascape Golf Course, things of that scale. Are all pretty much located in this area here. This is also vulnerable to seawater intrusion right on the coast. And it's likely that the projects and management actions that will be included in the plan will be located around here or just outside of this area. Yeah. There's also seawater intrusion at these locations, I should point out, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with now. The Aromas area, now I've been talking about its vulnerability to contamination, and it's already intruded by seawater. And it's influenced by a neighboring basin. That's another possibility, but it goes quite far inland, you see there. This is well, this is the outcrop map again with the yellow color that you see here is of the alluvial deposits within the river valleys. But you can't see them terribly well because I also wanted to put some information of the, what's it called, special status of species. And just to show you where steelhead are in this red color over here, and there's salamander, and there's all sorts of things down here. But you can kind of see this kind of, people have talked maybe if there is an influence by pumping, we should have maybe management areas around these ribbons. It's kind of, and I think that's kind of difficult because they're not very continuous. But we're still trying to determine what the impact of pumping is on these streams. And let me just show you what that means. When we just say that, I'm not sure you understand all the possible combinations of impacts. Up here is another one of my sketches. And here you have an alluvial valley. This is the valley. It's like if you did a cross section here, this yellow would be in here. We've got the creek flowing up here, and then below it is Purisima Formation. Now, a shallow well right near the creek, private well, it's probably going to influence. It's pumping, it's going to influence that creek, right? Then you get another well here, deeper well. It goes through both the alluvium and into the Purisima Formation. It may be screened at the top here, may be screened down here. But remember, I told you that well, it's a similar way. It's like the aromas that there's communication between anything that recharges in the creek will go into the alluvium and will go into the underlying Purisima. So if you're pumping over here, you're possibly going to influence this creek, maybe. If you're down here, just screened down here, and you've got this confining layer, well, you're probably not going to influence that creek very much. I mean, there's all sorts of combinations, and our model is not so precise that we can know exactly where every well is screened. So this is the kind of complexity. And then if you're in an area, some areas don't have alluvium. You know, you may have seen it where the creek flows over like sandstone, and that's a Purisima that's outcropped in the riverbed. It may have moved out of its alluvial channel or something like that. Main Street is like this, I think. And a well down here is not going to, or if it's screened just down here, it's not going to influence. If it's screened here, maybe, because it might be quite far down and it's not very permeable. So, I mean, these are all the things that we are thinking about. So it's one of the more complex things, and I found out other GSPs are grappling with the same thing. They've had to adjust how their modeling is done based just on the surface water. So that's part of the reason for the delay, is we really want to try and get that right. So if you put everything together, all of those different areas that I put on there, that I've just shown you, the green that you can't see, and the purple you can see, the yellow you can't see. Next time I'm doing everything in bright colors. The aromas and the hatching you can barely see. But anyway, is there grounds for different management areas based on this? You know, I'm tending to think that this area down here has a lot of overlapping, you know, issues here. You have this connection to Pajaro Valley, and it's where a lot of pumping happens, and it's close to the coast. I don't think extending it inland is a problem. There's no undesirable results happening in this area out here. There's this gap in between, that's what these question marks are, and I would think that you would, if this might be the area of production, municipal production might be a management area or not, but I would probably extend it out further, because there is an influence beyond inland of those production wells. And we know of some influence on some monitoring wells here. So, you know, knowing that there is this difference between the Aromas and the Purisima area, I'd like to hear what you guys will think about different management areas. And remember that we're looking at, would you really need to manage this area differently than this area up here in the north? And do you really need a different management area to manage them differently?
And does that really boil down to having different sustainability criteria? Is that what we're talking about?
You know, it's a little confusing the way that it was written, that I extracted that from some DWR document. Every single one of these wells has a different sustainability management criteria, but the way you develop them, is it different, I think is what they're referring to. Because you can't have just one number for everything. You know, they all have their own unique metrics.
Georgina, would it be helpful to kind of describe a little bit like the characteristics that you would have in a management area? Is it the way that you monitor the wells that you're, is it identifying the monitoring wells and then the way that you would monitor them differently? Or is it the fact that, let's say, if we were thinking about the Aromas, that we would, because we have so little control over what's going on if all the municipal pumping is already shut off there, and we don't have, we have a neighboring basin that has a lot of projects that don't reach up to their area, that have a lot of influence on that area. Like, can you just kind of describe some of the things that would let the GSP committee think about it more carefully?
Yeah. I don't think how you monitor things should define management areas. I don't think if you monitor along the coast 4 times a year and up here only once a year, I don't think that warrants it being a different management area. I do think that in an area where you have less influence, that your management actions and projects cannot influence that area very much, that you are relying on a neighbor, that maybe is, to me, the thing that warrants a different management area.
So that was one of my questions I was going to ask, is because the development of the GSP, and this is maybe for DWR and the process, is you can weigh in when a neighboring basin is developing their GSP and say, hey, we have a concern with this, but if, now that Brian's gone, if Pajaro has submitted theirs and it's going to be accepted in that, what's our way to kind of weigh into that process?
You're saying if this does get accepted, how do we weigh in because they've already done it?
Right.
No, so they will have reviews. And like ours, the 5-year review I was talking about is you can, adaptive management is allowed in these plans, and you can change things as real conditions change. So for everything we're doing is a prediction, that you can change that going forward every 5 years, or even sooner if you really need to. And I think that's when, that's when you would. He already said that there are some projects and they want to implement. Well, I think most of them off further south they want to implement within 5 years. But the ones up north, maybe they may have to.
And it showed coming up a foot for those, which is exactly what it usually showed us, that it was a foot.
And we also did a sensitivity run before where we actually increased the general head boundary there by the boundary along between the basins by 3 feet. Cameras was being generous. We knew it was 1 foot, but he increased it 3. And that also had quite a big influence on lifting levels above minimum thresholds.
So if we're being told we can expect at best a foot, and is that, I guess it's a question for you, does that make it a management area? But how do you manage to have low expectations, or is that even the right question?
I guess the part, I agree that it seems like the Aroma seems to be where we should maybe create a second management area. It's almost because we don't have control. We're essentially losing water to the groundwater. I know that's a simplification.
Well, we lose water out here too, but it's not undesirable.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it seems like that because we almost have less ability to kind of, we're more dependent, maybe is a nice way of putting it, on another agency. Like we have less ability to kind of have control no matter how many projects that we have to, I feel like that almost justifies having a separate management area. Because like right now, when we set all of our earlier conditions, we were able to say inland this versus, you know, coastal that, but they're not necessarily different management areas, although we can talk about that, that might be possible, but I feel like with the southern portion of our basin, it's not just setting different standards, because no matter what we do, we're kind of dependent on how many feet they go up. Otherwise, we can shove all the water we want down there, it's not gonna do us a lot of good. And so I guess that makes me more willing, I guess that kind of rises to the level of maybe warranting a management area, is kind of how I feel about it.
So I think that's two comments that it makes sense to do something in the south.
But it's also, I think, a question to, I mean, there are people that are more stakeholders in the rooms that would be interested to hear their thoughts.
Yeah, and I'd also like to hear what DWR is seeing, where they've seen similar type situations where one GSA is pulling from another GSA and how that's being resolved. Maybe at the end we can hear it. Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, we were just saying that if there's not a large ability of us to affect changes in that area, and if it's a question of whether or not that warrants a separate management area, I just said I wanted to hear what the stakeholders in that area have.
To us, it's Central Water District, because it's a good portion of Central Water is included in that. I think it does make sense because Aromas is so much different than the Purisima. And you know, like Allison said, there's not very much we can do in that area that's going to have any impact. We're going to be relying on collaboration with our neighbors. It depends on what we decide to do within that, you know, the actions that we take within that management action. But I think for the most part, we're almost forced to go into that direction. And then just work closely. I can see us long-term working with PVWMA to make sure they get that grant funding to move forward with, you know, implementing that pipeline going further north.
So thanks for that, Ralph. So there was a question for DWR. Do you provide guidance or examples of when you have abutting basins where one basin is really impacting another in a certain area, and have they considered using management areas as a tool to address that dynamic?
So I don't have a direct one right now. They're just starting their interbasin coordination. There's a meeting next Tuesday for the South Valley, a lot of the basins in the southern portion. They're going to meet, and actually the water rollers are going to get together. They are going to identify their differences. So they've just started those discussions. So I don't really have a good example. I think the only one that I have where they've kind of discussed management areas is in the Merced area. There's an area called El Nido, and it has substantial subsidence there, and it's between the three basins. It's Merced, Delta Mendota, Chachel, thank you. And so they have talked about turning that into kind of like a management area, because it's kind of going forward, they imagine it's going to be a shared responsibility, or they're going to have to identify who's really impacting what. And so there's different discussions about maybe having that be a management area like on their GSPs and treating it a little different for that reason. That I did want to kind of try to address the question about having undesirable results. So with the management area, the undesirable results still have to be defined for the entire basin, and it still has to be in line with that. I'm not sure you can do a different undesirable result for a management area. So I'm not, so I'll have to get back to you on that as far as like whether you have the ability to do something different. My understanding is that if in the undesirable results are still consistent, you can just set different minimum thresholds. So I guess I'm not sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
One thing I would like to add too is you're talking about multiple different management areas.
No, I think only probably one.
One, okay.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say that each management area that is within the plan has certain things which you have to describe. So that's all sub-article 2, the basin settings. So you would have to describe that entire thing, that entire management area for sub-article 2.
So I saw some hands up myself, Ralph, and then that's the Keith. Sorry. And then David, and other hands up, and John. Okay. Yeah, Keith.
So I'm trying to correlate your earlier presentation with this presentation to try and understand what the management area should be. On your earlier one, I believe like you have wells in the Aromas Sands, is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, but you showed that anything you do in the Aromas Sands doesn't impact their wells or any of the other wells. The only thing that impacts their wells is what's going to be closer to the house. So in a way, if you take that data, I look at this and I say the only management area is that most southern part, because that's the only thing you showed management actions on the Aromas Sands affected in the So it wouldn't be that whole stripe there, it would just be a little tiny.
So you're just saying, just right here, instead of this.
That, when I try and put your two pieces together, that's what I see. So tell me I'm wrong. Okay.
You know, it's interesting, you know, this boundary was, I had a director that was on my board that helped set that boundary 1984, whatever it was. And you can see our Central Water District boundary, it's our outer boundary, that's PVWMA's boundary, because he said it, he just wanted to make sure Central Water wasn't in that PVWMA boundary. I've talked with John Ricker and I've hinted, we kind of joked about it, but it's almost best if at some point in time maybe slice that section off at the bottom there and
give it back to Paul.
Give it back to PVWMA.
Hey, John, did you want to weigh in on that or piggyback on that?
Well, Ralph and I have sort of been half joking about that, but there is some hydrogeologic, just, reasons to do that, and particularly when, no matter what we do, that we can't really benefit that. That clearly shows that that area is more under the influence of what goes on in Pajaro Valley than what goes on in Midtown. The other thing that I was going to say is that you can do things other than having management areas. For instance, where we're talking about impact on streams, you can have some sort of guidelines or policies that deal with wells that are, say, within 1,000 feet of a stream or within an alluvial area of a stream, without having to define that as a management area. Or you can have protection of recharge areas, high permeability areas, without defining those as separate management areas.
And for the reasons that Amanda outlined, a lot of people are not wanting to go the management area route because it's a lot more work for not very much benefit to the GSP in the end.
David, and then give it a couple minutes and we'll wrap this up.
I have to tell you that I find the whole discussion about management areas to be too obtuse to be able to make any kind of meaningful decision, especially when I try to reconcile it with some of the prior information that we have. We seem to, some of our modeling seems to tell us that most of the more inland pumpers, the smaller pumpers, have de minimis impact on the basin. And that the real action is happening in the coastal areas where the municipal pumpers are happening. But we're talking about, at least talking about the possibility of not regulating the inland pumpers at all because their impact is so little. So I don't see anything here that tells us what's the working definition of a management area that even enables us to distinguish those two extremes. Or what the benefit is of having them, because we also know that on a certain level, each well is its own study and has to be managed based on its unique characteristics, whether it's a monitor well or a pumping well, an injection well, whatever, that they all have to be, and we're not going to have a separate management area for each one. So what's the definition that we're working with that would enable us to make an intelligent decision about any of this? Other than the fact that I just find it very confusing.
Yeah. So I said maybe more of the benefits that we would gain, like what
example, so with the subsidence example, they're thinking they're gonna have to do a lot more monitoring. So if you're thinking there's an area where you think the basin-wide, you'd be okay with a monthly reading. You think a daily reading is necessarily like they do with the subsidence. Or, more frequent monitoring, then you could consider that it's different, right, than the rest of the basin. So you would consider that maybe you need to manage that monitor just because of monitoring. You just want more monitoring more often, and then you want to set more restrictive thresholds there at that one location. So let's say like there's a canal and you want to set your management area around that. You're going to monitor that and report on that more frequently than you would all the other wells in the basin. And then set different kind of threshold, just more restrictive. Maybe your undesirable result is a little, I wouldn't say harsh, but just a little different than you would look at the rest of the basin, just because you're aware of a condition in there that is different than something that's basin-wide.
Yeah, we could say that about almost any of our wells.
Sorry, didn't you say that a management area can't have a different undesirable result from the rest of the stuff?
Right.
So the undesirable result has to be the same across the whole basin.
Yeah, you're just looking at it, you're just aware of a situation that is going to heed different...
More vigilance.
Yes.
But if the way we decide to manage things is to set criteria that might tell us, as we're going based on information, where we're going to monitor more closely or more frequently than others, then there would be no need for management areas because you would just be making the management decisions as you go.
Well, but wouldn't you sort of say, if you were taking the aromas and you're going to say just the purple part, when you say the undesirable result is whatever we've already described it for seawater intrusion and groundwater levels, but you would make a different minimum threshold that would say in the aromas part, we want to maintain it, not let it get any worse. In the non-aromas part, we actually want to recover. The minimum threshold looks different in the Purisima part of it than in the aromas part of it.
But to David's point, each monitoring well has different levels already.
Right.
Would the management area let us do that any easier or not? Right, I mean, I think that is your point.
I have a hard time with a lot of the science, but that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. So if each one's already independent, then what does grouping them under a management area?
What Rotary though is talking about is a significant and reasonable conditions that we set right from the beginning of each of the indicators, right? And now we're also talking about undesirable results, and those are the sustainability management criteria. But although Amanda has told us about this difference of monitoring, we also have, I think I already said that, up here they might only sample, measure levels, I think it's twice a year up in the county wells, right? And down here they're on data logs. But that doesn't warrant to me a different, and that's groundwater levels. That's not maybe such you don't need to be on top of it so as much as subsidence, which is going to have it has an immediate effect.
But that's why I say we don't have a clear enough definition of what it means to have a different management area when both of those things that you're describing could be encompassed within the same one. How do we make that decision? What are the real criteria here if those can be in the same zone?
It's vague. And what I presented right at the beginning of this is part of what is available. This language here is what we have to go on.
Yeah, but so in the end, what we as a committee have to go on is that our expert staff is going to make some recommendations to us that hopefully will make sense when we get there.
So just want to get any other comments on this before we wrap, so especially comments like this one mentioned.
So when I look at that map, and we've been talking about this for months now, we know that the chloride concentrations in those southern, really eastern wells are higher. If we set that as a separate management area, can we change the standard that we use to evaluate those?
Like the thresholds on that.
Is that one of the advantages that we could implement by having a separate management area?
We can do that without having a management area.
We can. We can set more liberal standards, because we already know we're starting at a much higher concentration down there. Does that make sense to address it that way?
I thought the standard was, when Sigma was passed, you're not supposed to go any worse than that.
You can get better.
Right.
Right.
But so we drew a line around that. Remember the line goes like
Yeah,
this.
the
they accommodate.
isoponto goes in like this,
Yeah.
and it goes in over here
Right.
too, actually, the first.
Yeah.
So we're already
We've done
establishing
that.
it as a separate area in a way.
We're treating it differently.
By drawing- by
Yeah,
drawing
yeah,
that
in a way. We didn't draw a straight line.
That's how we're dealing with that.
Yeah.
That's for seawater intrusion, though, not for water levels.
Chloride.
Right.
But they're related.
So Keith, and then we want to ask you, Georgina, is there any other questions? Because we need to wrap it and go on to the next item. So Keith?
I would say it's the reason for having another management area is that you have different management actions. But do we have to have a separate area to have different actions?
And just, I mean, I think you've said this a couple times, but my understanding is you're saying that you would not have different minimum thresholds or different measurable objectives for a defined management area. It would still be an entire basin determination as to those issues?
No, it's localized. Each of the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives of each well is individually selected for that well. It's not for
It's the undesirable results.
Okay.
Or the representative monitoring well.
For each representative monitoring well.
Okay.
Gets its own metric.
That's a key clarification. So Dave's asking the question, if we're already doing that, what are we getting by creating management area? So I think the request to staff is to better articulate.
And I'm also asking what the definition of a management area is if those
Exactly.
treatments don't require it.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like closing. I want to close. Okay. And I just put up all these ideas because I've heard them over the course of the year. In our office, we don't think there should be any management areas.
Thank you.
When we talked about it amongst ourselves, Cameron is like, why do we need this? And after hearing what Amanda's had to tell us, other basins are thinking the same way. And I do think that you can, with the influence from Pajaro Valley, that we could work that out without having a different management area. So that's my
Question, perhaps irrelevant, but if at the 5-year mark or 10-year mark, one were to decide we do need a management area, can they be added
I
up?
believe so. I think you could, right?
Oh, we should understand that later.
So one other possible reason for having a separate management area would be if you could impose fees differently in that management area. Is that true or not?
No, you don't need to have a different management area for that either. We thought that initially, but.
I thought we ran into 26 and 218 when Brian was talking about that, about the people up in the hills versus.
No, you can have zones of, like these zones of benefit or these different rate areas, and you don't need separate management.
Okay,
areas.
well then I don't see why we go to the hassle.
Okay.
Yes, Kate, last word.
Yeah. In terms of the impact of an adjoining basin on the resource, as we have here, that we're all acknowledging that, Pajaro's conduct has a pivotal impact on that zone that is in the Aromas area. Does DWR contemplate cross-boundary collaborative effort zones that might become a condition of adjoining basin plan approvals?
Not directly. I would say that the way that we are addressing it is during the review process is your GSP is not allowed to impact an adjacent basin and vice versa. So I think I've asked, honestly, I didn't get an answer from my lawyers. And I think they just need time to think it through. And I think we need to wait to see what the results of the alternative plan decision is before I can really give a solid, and for you guys at least. So I don't really have an answer except that when we look at the plans, that is part of what we are reviewing, the impacts, and that a plan is not allowed to impact any business.
This is different. It's not our plant can't impact them.
It's
We want their management actions to impact us. It's, as a matter of fact, the only thing that will impact that area, as near as we can tell, is some action they do.
Well, wait a second.
When
you're looking at that definition, you're saying, isn't there a word missing that there shouldn't be an adverse impact on?
Yes,
Right.
yes, adverse.
Okay.
Adverse.
So you could actually have something in your plan that results in you coordinating with an adjacent basin, just so it doesn't have an adverse impact.
Right, adverse.
Okay.
Yes, sorry.
Well,
Yeah.
this is helpful feedback on this topic that we've been playing with for a while and that we've now delved deeper into. And we're hearing that there's not a strong case to be made at this point, that anyone, in the advisory committee or the technical team is advocating for, although I think we may continue to discuss it as we go into next year. So, you have one more slide that we want to talk about?
Oh,
In the
this is
next
gonna be
topic?
super quick, yeah. So
So now we're moving to the 750 item, we're a little behind the district bill.
this should be a few minutes. So I've already, so the table, did you guys get that? The table, the model summary should be in your packet. And so you asked us to add in red anything we add on, and I'm not sure next time, I guess we'll make that blue and add the next changes in red. But I've already summarized those. Those were those 3 different sensitivity runs where we eliminated pumping. And so, but they're now being built on in that table. That's in.
Yes, okay, so that table that's in your packet, that describes the assumptions that are going to the model, this is a living document. We're going to be updating it each and every meeting with the new modeling runs that are being done so that you guys can track essentially what the modeling is looking at, and it's meant to be a reference so that, what are we looking at the model, and you can look at that document and they'll tell you what we're thinking.
Well, just sort of transition from our previous discussion, in the model scenarios you did one scenario with the groundwater levels of Pajaro coming up 3 feet. Brian and tonight presented something that said with their current basin management plan, the groundwater levels, I think they're going to come up around
2 to 4.
0 to 1 or something. So it potentially could be interesting to run that again with what they say they're going to do. And that helps us put pressure on them and say, okay, well, you guys need to do more. Let's work together to do more within this area to bring those levels up, whether it's extending the delivered water pipeline and or promoting more recharge projects in that area to bring those levels up to where we need them to be to meet our objectives.
And in that table, in that section, there is also red added in that part where we adjusted the level, because I think Cameron compared that to reducing pumping, or eliminating that pumping, the private pumping in Pajaro. And I forget now which one is the greater effect, but I think raising those levels up has a greater effect.
Yeah, it seemed like eliminating the private pumping, it only came up like 1 to 2 or something.
1.5 foot. And then, and the other was 3 foot. And then I guess that was a 3 foot rise, so if it went only up 1 foot, it would only be 1 foot, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And could more modeling runs be done to incorporate some of their anticipated?
We have to discuss that.
Okay, good. Any final questions on that scenarios and assumptions document? Yeah, John.
The last one on the table says Pure Water SoCal project to be discussed at December 2018 GSP Advisory Committee meeting.
January now, I guess, I did not update that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the close read.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that one.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, so it's 8:12. We want to move to our final public comment, and here we invite comment in particular on the discussion we just had, the differences between the Aromas and Purisima areas and implications for the GSP. If you want to comment on management areas in particular, we'd like to hear that. So if we can see a show of hands and members of the public would like to speak. This is one. Okay, so Becky, you're a speaker. You
Thank you. I have Becky Steinbruner, customer of small water company. I have a question about the slide where you were talking about the seascape area and the nitrate levels. You mentioned that maybe it was because of septic tanks. How do you know the source? How do you determine that? There is agriculture in that area, and I just wondered about your comment regarding septic tanks in that area and the nitrate levels.
So your comment is just that question there?
Yes, that's my question.
Okay. Well, there's agriculture. The nitrate could come from that, but because in the same well there are these CECs, that's what suggests that there's a wastewater source.
I'm sorry?
There are pharmaceuticals in the same well,
Ah.
and so that suggests that it's a wastewater source.
Thank you.
That area also has pretty small lots, very sandy soils, and most of them are using seepage pits where they're discharging the effluent fairly deep, so it doesn't get a lot of treatment. And I think it's likely that one of those wells may be picking up one or two plumes actually come in individual systems, so that those wells are particularly high and susceptible to elevated nitrate levels.
How deep are those pits, the septic
They
tanks?
typically run 50 to 60 feet deep.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's all in sand. Sand
Right.
generally does not remove
Right, it's quick
nitrogen
work.
from sewage effluent. The effluent converts to nitrate relatively rapidly because it is a low-risk environment with the sand. So, and nitrate moves very rapidly through that material. Once it converts to nitrate, it's pretty mobile.
Uh-huh.
The
Thank you.
treatment, it's the treatment, basically what you're saying is the treatment mechanism, whatever it is, soils or whatnot, are not robust enough to.
Right.
In
In
sand.
current standards, we wouldn't allow pits in those locations in that close proximity to those wells. We're actually now looking at more, when some of those folks are needing to repair their systems, they're going to need to use enhanced treatment to actually treat the effluent before it goes into the pits. But that was all done back before we had any kind of standards in the wells. And actually, I think Taj found something that said there should have been deed restrictions on the parcels around the wells, and they should not have been developed, but no, that all got lost in the shuffle.
Well, there's the county code setback. You can't have a well within a certain distance, but the water travels faster, huh?
The setback should be quite a bit more than 100 feet for a municipal well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. All right, so a couple final items. First, we want to get a confirmation on 2 meeting summaries that came out of our October 23rd field trip and then the October 24th advisory committee meeting. We want to move these on to the board for their consideration, but want to first check in to see whether the committee has any comments or questions about either of those 2 summaries. If you do, please let us know now.
I would say it was an incredible job of recording what happened on the field.
Thank you, and I actually would like to give a shout out for Cece. I don't know how she did it either. Okay, so we will move those on to the board for its consideration. And so just looking ahead to next steps, I did want to go back to this again and talk a little bit. So this is, again, looking through June and into the month of July where we're hoping that this committee can deliver its recommendations to the board and just talk about the next 3 months and what we're hoping to do. Again, just want to give you guys a feel for where we're moving into the future. So our next meetings, no more meetings in December. It's now holiday celebrations for everybody on the committee and the public. Our next meeting is January 23rd. And there we will be looking at more modeling results, and in particular we'll be sharing some of the modeling results for the Clearwater SoCal project. We'll probably be talking more about this issue of the challenge of seawater intrusion in that southeast corner in the Aromas area. And we'll be, continuing to talk about some of these sensitivity analyses that Rosemary, that Georgina spoke of. In February, we're going to turn back to, as John mentioned earlier, one of the sustainability indicators, that the surface water interaction one that we've been talking about now, but we haven't really been able to talk about specific recommendations around sustainable management criteria. So staff will come with a proposal for the consideration by the committee, and we'll have a discussion like we did for the other 4 that we've already done. We're hoping to initiate a discussion around funding mechanisms, so it was actually nice to hear a presentation from Brian today about some of these steps that they've done to fund some of their projects, so some ideas that might be pertinent. We will also be looking for additional modeling runs on, so far it's been mostly runs on individual management measures or individual projects, and we might start looking in February at what happens if you start combining some of these in different ways, seeking out sustainability and what do those look like. And the final topic that has come up before, and we were looking for a time to delve back into it, is this idea of, what is the relationship between land use planning and water, and how are we understanding that as a committee, because it's something that certainly provides important context for this basin. And then in March, we'll hit the final sustainability indicator that we haven't done in detail, and that's the groundwater storage. And we've been saying from the beginning that in some ways that sustainability indicator for this basin rolls out of all the other ones. And so we will essentially come back to the committee with a proposal for what the sustainable management criteria for that one would look like. We'll also make some suggestions for interim milestones for the different indicators. And we'll go back to the rest of the sustainability indicators and say, so based upon what we're learning ongoing from the models, does it make sense to be changing some of these sustainable management criteria based upon the initial recommendations that have been coming out of the committee? So let's look back again in this iterative process. If you remember the funnel diagram, let's go back and say, have we been learning things that would cause us to shift in these recommendations? And then finally, I think we were going to share a little bit of recommendations on, I guess, go back to the initial recommendations around representative monitoring wells, and does the committee think that those might be modified in some way based upon the months of discussion that has taken place since then? So that's the next 3 months, and then, as I mentioned before, April will be ongoing refinement of these sustainable management criteria, discussion of interim milestones, but then moving into the implementation plan. We'll go back, talk about funding some more, and about implementation in terms of monitoring. So any questions about how this can proceed? Well, hopefully that gives everybody a feel. John?
Well, there's been some discussion about some folks wanting to do a deeper dive into the model, and the possibility of having like a dedicated workshop for that. I was curious to see maybe a show of hands of who would like to do that. Is that John?
Marco, John,
Oh, okay. Well, that's something we'll think about, and we're still, part of the reason we haven't given you what we said we were going to give you is because it's not done yet, so we don't want to give you the preliminary stuff and then say, oh, that was wrong, we know better now, so we're sort of trying to get that last piece of the stream flow and the alluvium at that point.
So John, deeper dive into what part of the model?
Well, it'll be sort of the model, how the model works. I mean, the key parts of how the model works, not the details and not all the calculations, but just to get more comfortable with how the model works, and then the assumptions that go into it, and then some of the steps, the increments that go into that. We were talking about changes in groundwater level or changes in storage, and how the model looks at history and then also projects forward.
So staff will look at convening a workshop like that to allow for this deeper dive, and I saw, at least initially, hands up from Marco, Kate, Keith, and John, and others will be invited too.
It's John Kennedy, John Mayer, Kate, Keith, and Marco.
Oh, John Mayer too? Sorry.
Will the public be invited?
Yeah, so
Any reason why the public could be invited?
That's what we did with the Wassac. I mean,
Right.
the deep dives into the city modeling, we also included members of the public, people like me who go and hear about it too and participate. So.
So we'll.
I would like
we'll
to-
schedule
I would
something
like to
that
join.
And then to just post it, and make it available to members of the public.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Final thank you, John, for bringing that up. I know that we've heard this request from specific advisory committee members to go deeper into the model to better understand it. So you can come back and actually speak back to the rest of the committee, saying, here's what I understand about it. The whole discourse we did with committee benefits. Okay, so I think that's it. Anything else before we adjourn?
Just one last thing, could you put John Bargetta there so I'm totally confused with everything else?
All right. Okay, everybody, thank you very much for